What is Dungeons and Dragons?
I sometimes get asked by people on the internet. Hello, and welcome to Rory's Brainworks, where we get creative and see if it works. Today is the initial run of my Dungeons and Dragons portions of my YouTube channel. As I said way back in my introduction, that this would not only be about shibari, rope bondage, the BDSM world, but also the other things going around in my brain. One of my other major passions is Dungeons and Dragons. Not unsurprising, it has dungeon in the name, but I was playing D&D before I was tying people up with rope. And D&D is far less dangerous. I mean, unless you believe the angry, scared, moral panic of the 1980s. The satanic panic. It was a better time then. So not only will I be going into the deep complexity of Dungeons and Dragons, but I will work my way there. That way, those of you who have no idea about this world can be involved, can find your way into it. Because I guarantee you, discovering Dungeons and Dragons, understanding it, and playing it will change you. And likely for the better. So how do I explain D&D to those of you who have never played before? And maybe even to those of you who've been doing it for as long as I have, more than 12 years. I think I have a pretty okay way of doing it. So, how to explain Dungeons and Dragons? Well, you have to break it down into its base components. Dungeons and Dragons is an improvisational storytelling game. Let me ask you this. Have you ever been hanging out with a group of friends and some strange hypothetical comes up and you and your friends are joking about the different things that could happen in that hypothetical, watching it play out, having a good time? That is the essence of Dungeons and Dragons. It isn't necessarily what the hypothetical is about. It's the fact that you and your friends are being weird and imagining things, making jokes, having fun, ignoring base reality. In a way, that is what Dungeons and Dragons is. Except one of those friends is facilitating, moderating the conversation. They're adding and subtracting things to make it a little bit more interesting, and also making sure that this hypothetical you and your friends are talking about stays on track. So let's break that down. You can deconstruct Dungeons and Dragons into three moving parts: the Dungeon Master, the players, and the game mechanics. What are these cogs in the machine? Well, the Dungeon Master is the person that creates a story. Imagine the narrator of a book. The players are the characters waltzing around in this narration that the Dungeon Master has created. And the game mechanics help facilitate the ability to make it happen. Sometimes to make it go awry, sometimes to create lasting memories. Now, a Dungeon Master is usually someone who has played the game extensively before. Not all the time, but it certainly helps. Because as they facilitate a story, creating a scenario, creating this hypothetical, the players can almost literally do anything in it. And trust me, they will. The game mechanics allow the Dungeon Master to dictate whether or not the players can actually do that. And sometimes the Dungeon Master has the ability to bend reality, bend the rules, so long as it makes it more interesting, more dynamic, and to ensure that the players have more fun. So how do you play a game where anything could happen? Trust me, it's not easy. It's difficult. Which is the intimidating factor that I think a lot of people see when they think about playing Dungeons & Dragons, approaching it from an outside perspective, knowing almost literally nothing about it. But it's not. You understand how to play the game because the game mimics life. So why would anyone want to be a Dungeon Master if it's such a hard role to do? It also has its perks. It's very fun. Me, I'm a storyteller. I like to spin tales. I like to watch the reactions of my friends as I put a twist into whatever they're trying to do. Dungeons and Dragons is just an ornate storytelling game where you use the theater of the mind, the greater parts of your imagination, helped out by so few game mechanics and those beautiful, beautiful mystical math rocks, dice. So how did this all start? Well, it begins with the two co-creators of D&D, Gary Gygax, obviously the name of an incognito wizard on our realm, and Dave Arneson. Both men were miniature wargame enthusiasts. What are those, you might ask? Well, imagine if chess and Risk had a baby. So if your knight wanted to take a pawn, it needed to roll dice to see if the odds were in its favor. Who knows? The pawn could get lucky and defend well against the invading knight, winning the battle. The two men met playing at Gygax's Gen Con, which Gary created in 1968 to bring miniature wargame players together. And that convention is now the largest con for miniature wargames, board games, tabletop role-playing games like D&D, and even computer games now. Gary and Dave bonded over a miniature wargame Gygax had created called Chainmail. But the two also loved fantasy stories, tales of chivalry in times of yore, and they mashed adventure role-playing game elements with miniature wargame tactics, creating Dungeons and Dragons, except no one would publish their rulebooks. There was no market for what they were doing at the time, so what do? That's right, you create your own publishing company. Gary partnered up with another friend, Don Kay, to create Tactical Studies Rules Incorporated, or just TSR Inc. TSR, with difficulty, acquired funding from the wargame societies they were a part of to print off the first rulebook of D&D in 1974. And using Gygax's basement as a headquarters, they produced 1,000 copies of that first rulebook, selling out in just under 10 months. The second printing sold out even faster, and that is when the small world of modern tabletop role-playing games changed. Because now, when that knight tries to take that pawn on the board, there are deeper consequences. The knight and the pawn have backstories, personal moral dilemmas. They each have a story to tell, and people loved it. They absolutely just ate it up. So now you know what the game is about. You know a little bit of the origin. How do you play it? I'll tackle that next time. And I'll also give you another little tasty morsel of the origins of Dungeons and Dragons. Wait, I hope that helped explain Dungeons and Dragons in a way that doesn't make you feel intimidated anymore, makes it feel a little bit more approachable, and that you understand why people may like it. Marie was late to DM her own game, which I didn't know she did. Apparently she did. She left me her drinking horn, which smells a lot like permanent marker and vanilla ice cream. I'm not gonna think about that too much. I hope you enjoyed yourselves, and I must thank my other sponsors for today, the lovely people at Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rory's Brainworks, just like this YouTube channel. They are my little dice goblins, my colonizers of dreams. And without them, these endeavors would be way harder to accomplish. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to this madness, and comment down below what kind of other D&D topics you would like me to teach you. As always, I'm Rory. This is my brain. I'm fairly certain it works. Be safe and go create some art.